Silver moonlight slipped through the silk curtains, casting faint shimmering patterns onto the gleaming hardwood floor of the luxury suite at Manhattan's most opulent hotel. Aaliyah Carter sat motionless on the edge of the king-sized bed, her pristine white wedding dress clinging to her like a cruel reminder of the contract she had just signed. Her hands clenched tightly, her heart thudding wildly, as if trying to burst from her chest. Across from her, by the towering window overlooking the city lights, Ethan Caldwell stood silently, a glass of whiskey in hand, reflecting a cold metallic gleam. His back faced her, his tall frame wrapped in a flawless black suit, as still as a statue carved from stone, never once turning around. 20 minutes had passed since they entered the room, yet no word had been exchanged. The air was heavy, suffocating, as if both were trapped inside an invisible glass cage. Just hours earlier, beneath the dazzling chandelier of the banquet hall, Aaliyah had signed the contract that made her Ethan's wife, a white billionaire with ice-gray eyes, who owned not only the skyscraper they stood in, but also the massive debt her family owed the small house in a Chicago slum, and according to the marriage license, her very self. Aaliyah swallowed hard, trying to calm the whirlwind of thoughts. She, a 25-year-old black woman, raised in the narrow alleys of poverty, once dreamed of true love. Now she sat here bound by a transaction she had no power to refuse. Ethan Caldwell, whom all of New York called the Soulless One for his ruthless business dealings, had become her husband, not for love, but through a cold-hearted deal. She felt as though she had just sold her soul in exchange for her mother's survival and her brother's future. Ethan took a slow sip of whiskey, the clinking of ice breaking the silence. He still didn't turn around, but his deep voice pierced the room sharp as a blade. "Are you all right?" The unexpected question startled Aaliyah. She bit her lip, trying to steady her voice. I don't know if I am." She looked up at his back. "And you? How does buying a wife like you're buying merchandise feel?" For a brief moment, she saw his shoulders stiffen, as if her words had struck a nerve. Ethan slowly turned around, his gray eyes sweeping over her cold, yet hiding something unreadable. "You are not merchandise." "Aaliyah," he said, voice steady but weighted. "You are part of a contract, and I always respect my agreements." Aaliyah pressed her lips together, anger and helplessness rising within her. "A contract," she repeated bitterly. "You paid off my family's debts, my mother's medical bills, my brother's tuition at an elite school. In return, I became... what? A wife in name only, a decorative piece for your glamorous world." Ethan stepped closer, his eyes never leaving her face. "You can call it whatever you like," he said, his voice lowering almost a whisper. "But you chose this. I didn't force you to sign the contract." His words cut deep, slicing through her heart. Yes, she had chosen, but it was a choice between saving her family and keeping her freedom. She turned her face away, not wanting him to see the tears welling in her eyes. "Choice," she whispered. "You call it a choice when I had no way out." Ethan didn't respond right away. He stood there, glass still in hand, moonlight tracing his face's sharp, cold angles. At that moment, Aaliyah wondered if there was anything beneath that frozen exterior, or if he truly was the soulless one, as they said. "You should rest," he finally said, his voice slipping back into perfect control. He set the whiskey glass on the table and walked toward the armchair in the corner. "I'll sleep here tonight. You have the room." Aaliyah looked up, surprised. "You're not going to—" She trailed off, unwilling to speak the fear that had haunted her since they entered this room. Ethan looked at her, his eyes softening, if only for a second. "I'm not the kind of man who forces anyone, Aaliyah. We have time. But don't forget you are my wife. In every sense of the word. He turned away, grabbed a pillow from the bed, and sat in the chair, ending the conversation. Aaliyah lay down the luxurious silk sheets, unable to chase away the chill inside her. As she closed her eyes, she heard the steady rhythm of Ethan's breathing from the corner of the room, and a haunting question echoed in her mind. What did this man truly want from her? And would she be able to find herself within the golden cage he had built? The moonlight gradually faded as dark clouds shrouded the Manhattan sky. Inside the hotel suite, the air remained heavy, like a lingering curse. Aaliyah Carter lay on the luxurious bed, the silk blanket unable to soothe the cold grip clutching her heart. From the corner of the room came Ethan Caldwell's breathing from the armchair where he had chosen to sleep, keeping his promise not to force her on their wedding night. But that consideration brought Aaliyah no comfort. It only made her feel more trapped in a ruthless contract where she had no control. She closed her eyes, but sleep refused to come. Instead, memories from 3 months ago returned like a nightmare. Aaliyah remembered the long nights working as a waitress and janitor in Chicago, struggling to pay off the massive debt her father had left behind after dying of a heart attack. Her mother, Grace, was diagnosed with breast cancer shortly after, with medical bills stacking up uncovered by insurance. Her younger brother, Malik, 19, had given up his college dreams to work part-time. Aaliyah, once a promising nursing student, had dropped out to shoulder the family's burdens, hoping to keep their small house in the slums from being seized by the bank. Then Ethan Caldwell appeared like a ghost from the lavish world she had only seen on TV. A 35-year-old white billionaire head of New York's largest tech empire. He had proposed an offer she couldn't refuse: buy out her father's failed company, erase all their debts, cover her mother's full medical expenses, and fund a scholarship for Malik at an elite school. In return, Aaliyah had to become his wife, not just on paper, but his wife in every sense, as he emphasized that night. You should rest. Ethan's voice broke unexpectedly from the corner, snapping Aaliyah out of her thoughts. She opened her eyes and saw him still sitting there, his silhouette faint under the dim hallway light, leaking through the door crack. He wasn't looking at her, but his deep voice carried an undeniable weight. Tomorrow we leave the hotel early. You'll need your strength to adjust to your new life. Aaliyah sat up, her wedding dress askew, making her feel like a discarded doll. Adjust? She asked, her tone sharper than intended. You mean to adjust to being your property, a wife bought with money, nothing more? Ethan turned his head, his cold gray eyes flashing in the dark. You love playing the victim, he said, voice flat but razor-edged. But I didn't force you, Aaliyah. You signed the contract fully aware. I kept my word. Your family's debt is cleared. Your mother is under the best care, and your brother has a chance millions dream of. In return, I ask only one thing: that you fulfill your role, my role. Aaliyah echoed, her voice trembling with anger and pain. And what role is that, Ethan? A wife who stands next to you at glamorous parties, a trophy to show off to the white elite you mingle with? Or... She stopped, unable to voice the fear of what else he might expect in the future. Ethan stood walking toward the bed with slow, measured steps. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze locked onto hers, unflinching. You want the truth? He asked, his voice dropping low, almost a whisper. I need a wife who doesn't complicate things with emotions. No demands for love, no delusional dreams. I did my research, Aaliyah Carter. You're responsible and devoted, and you've never been in love a woman willing to sacrifice everything for her family. That's why I chose you. You're perfect. For what I need. His words landed like a punch to Aaliyah's chest. She felt exposed, and her worth was reduced to a checklist on Ethan's dossier. For what you need, she whispered, voice cracking. And what about me? Am I not allowed to have needs, feelings, freedom? Ethan stayed silent, his eyes flickering momentarily, as if her words touched an old wound. But instantly, the icy shell returned, masking any hint of vulnerability. Freedom is a luxury, Aaliyah, he said, his voice hard. You traded it to save your family. That was your choice, not mine. Aaliyah turned her face away, tears spilling quietly. She wanted to scream, to run from this room, from the man who stood before her, like an impenetrable wall. But she couldn't. Her family depended on her, on this contract, on her sacrifice. You don't understand, she whispered almost to herself. You don't understand how painful it is to sell yourself. Ethan didn't reply. He just stood there watching her in silence, his cold gray eyes now carrying something she couldn't quite name, regret perhaps, or just her imagination. Finally, he returned to the armchair, sat down and closed his eyes, as if the conversation had never happened. Sleep, he said, his voice hoarse. Tomorrow will be a long day. Aaliyah lay back down, her heart still pounding wildly. She stared at the ceiling, now cloaked in shadow, as the moon disappeared behind the clouds, leaving the room in darkness. In her mind, a question twisted deep, with no answer. Would she ever find light in the golden cage Ethan Caldwell had built? Or would she forever be a prisoner of her own choice? The sleek black Bentley glided down the suburban roads outside New York, leaving behind the dazzling lights of Manhattan. Aaliyah Carter sat silently in the back seat, her gaze fixed on the massive iron gates slowly opening, revealing the Caldwell estate, a gray stone mansion sprawling across 50 acres with lush green lawns and towering old trees standing like guards. She felt as though she had stepped into another world, strange and cold, a place with no room for a black girl who grew up in the cramped alleys of Chicago. Ethan Caldwell sat beside her, silently checking emails on his phone, his chiseled face betraying no emotion. He hadn't spoken a word during the ride, only occasionally glancing at her with an unreadable expression. Aaliyah clenched her hands, trying to mask the swelling sense of alienation. Just 24 hours ago, she was in her tiny apartment, where honking horns and the smell of car exhaust were part of daily life. Now she was Mrs. Caldwell, a title that felt like a suit 2 sizes too big. The car stopped at the marble steps leading into the mansion. A line of neatly dressed staff waited, their gazes curious but discreet. Aaliyah stepped out, her simple jeans dress making her feel all the more out of place amid such opulence. Ethan walked ahead, nodding to the staff, then turned back and held out his hand. His hand was warm, taking hers naturally, but with a quiet authority. "Welcome to your new home," he said, his voice deep but devoid of warmth. Mrs. Harris, an older black woman with neatly tied silver hair, stepped forward, her gentle smile softening the formal atmosphere. "Good evening, Mrs. Caldwell," she said warmly. "I'm Harris, the housekeeper. If you need anything at all, call me." Aaliyah nodded, forcing a polite smile, but the name Mrs. Caldwell made her shiver. It was a reminder that she didn't belong here. Mrs. Harris led Aaliyah through vast hallways, where million-dollar oil paintings hung on the walls, crystal chandeliers glittered like stars, and cold marble floors echoed underfoot. Finally, they stopped before a pair of mahogany doors on the second floor. "Your room," Mrs. Harris said, opening the door to reveal a space larger than Aaliyah's old apartment. Pale blue walls, white silk curtains, and a beautifully carved 4-poster bed dominated the room. One corner featured a sitting area with elegant armchairs, and 2 doors led to a bathroom, the size of a living room, and a massive walk-in closet. Aaliyah stepped inside, overwhelmed, but also deeply alone. "Everything was prepared to your measurements," Mrs. Harris explained, Gesturing to the closet filled with designer dresses, high heels and jewelry Aaliyah had only seen in magazines. Mr. Caldwell is very meticulous. He wanted you to feel comfortable. Comfortable, Aaliyah repeated bitterly. She touched a red silk dress, feeling like she was brushing against a dream that didn't belong to her. "Where's Mr. Caldwell's room?" she asked, trying to keep her voice calm. "The main suite is across the hall," Mrs. Harris replied, her eyes cautious. "He thought you might want your own space." She paused, then added in a lower voice, "Mr. Caldwell isn't easy to understand, but he's not malicious. I've worked for him for 20 years and seen things the press never writes about." Aaliyah looked at Mrs. Harris, curious, but asked no more. The housekeeper left, leaving her alone in the lavish room. She walked to the window, looking over an endless garden where sunlight shone on red rose bushes. But instead of feeling free, she felt like a bird in a gilded cage, beautiful but imprisoned. That evening, Aaliyah was invited to dinner, where a table long enough for 20 held only 2 place settings, one at each end, as far apart as 2 worlds. Ethan was already there, dressed in a white shirt and gray vest, reading documents beside his untouched plate. He looked up as she entered, his gaze briefly passing over the simple blue dress she had picked from the closet. "You look appropriate," he said, his tone flat like he was commenting on a piece of furniture. "Thank you," Aaliyah replied, sitting down, feeling more like a guest than a resident. A server appeared, silently opening her napkin. Dinner proceeded in silence, the only sound being cutlery tapping porcelain. Aaliyah looked at Ethan, wondering what he was thinking behind that cold mask. "How long have you lived here alone?" she asked, breaking the silence. Ethan paused, setting down his fork. "Since I bought the place 10 years ago," he replied, not looking at her. "It's convenient. I need space to work and to isolate yourself," Aaliyah said, her tone sharper than intended. She immediately regretted it, but Ethan only looked at her, his eyes flashing. Was it surprise or irritation? "You're more perceptive than I expected," he said, the corner of his mouth twitching, not quite a smile. "But you'll soon learn that isolation is sometimes the only way to survive." Aaliyah wanted to ask more, but Ethan returned to his documents as if she no longer existed. She finished the meal silently, feeling like she had touched a locked door. Back in her room, she heard the typing from Ethan's study echoing down the dark hallway. This man she thought was a puzzle she didn't yet know how to solve. But deep down, she wondered, was there something behind that icy wall? Or was she searching for light in a place that would never offer any? On the 8th night, at the Caldwell estate, a violent storm struck, howling, as if to swallow the world whole. The wind shrieked through the tall windows, rain pelted the glass like bullets, and thunder boomed like the drums of fate. Aaliyah Carter lay curled beneath a silk blanket in the luxurious room. But the elegance could not chase away the fear rooted deep since childhood. Each thunderclap was a memory of nights in the slums of Chicago, when she and her brother Malik clung to each other in a leaking apartment, praying the roof wouldn't collapse. She bolted upright, heart pounding, as a lightning bolt split the sky, briefly illuminating the room. Suddenly, the chandelier's soft lights went out, leaving darkness behind. The backup generator, something Mrs. Harris had once proudly called unfailing, also seemed to have surrendered to the storm. Aaliyah wrapped her arms around herself, her breathing shallow and quick. She couldn't stay here alone or face the darkness and the thunder without someone by her side. With what courage she had left, Aaliyah wrapped a robe around herself, grabbed the flashlight from her vanity, and stepped into the hallway. She paused in front of Ethan's door, the weak beam of the flashlight casting shadows on the mahogany wood. She knocked softly, her voice trembling. Ethan. No response. She knocked again, harder this time, but only silence answered. Taking a deep breath, she pushed the door open and found the room empty, the bed perfectly made as though it hadn't been touched. "Where is he at this hour?" Aaliyah whispered, fear mixed with curiosity. Another clap of thunder made her flinch. She remembered Ethan's study, where she had once heard the sound of typing late at night. Making a quick decision, she descended the cold marble stairs, the flashlight's beam flickering as it led her through the dark corridors, where tree shadows outside the windows looked like ghostly hands. The study door was ajar, a faint light slipping out from within. Aaliyah pushed it open, heart pounding. Ethan sat on the floor, back against the wall, eyes closed, sweat beading on his forehead. A half-empty whiskey bottle sat beside him, but the glass on the table was untouched, as if he hadn't managed a single sip. He was breathing slow and steady, as though trying to control some invisible pain. "Ethan," Aaliyah called softly, worry in her voice. His eyes opened, squinting against the flashlight's beam. For a moment, he looked panicked, like someone yanked from a nightmare. Then the cold mask returned, though it couldn't quite hide the tremble in his hands. "Aaliyah," he rasped. "What are you doing here?" "The power went out," she said, stepping inside the flashlight illuminating his pale face. I'm afraid of storms." She stopped, realizing she had just admitted a weakness. But then she noticed sweat on his forehead, clenched fists, eyes that wouldn't meet hers. "You're not okay, are you?" "What's wrong?" "I'm fine," Ethan lied, pushing himself up with apparent effort, staggering slightly and gripping the table for support. "The generator will kick in soon. Go back to your room." Aaliyah didn't move. Another flash of lightning lit up the room, and she saw the pain etched deep in his face. Not physical pain, but something more profound. "No, you're not fine," she said firmly. With her nursing knowledge, she recognized the signs of a severe migraine. Without thinking, she stepped forward, set the flashlight on the table, and raised her hands. "I can help. Let me." Ethan looked at her, eyes flickering between suspicion and exhaustion. Finally, he nodded, sitting reluctantly in the chair. Aaliyah gently placed her fingertips on his temples, massaging in slow, deliberate circles, applying enough pressure to ease the tension. "My mom had migraines too," she murmured, her voice as soft as if comforting a child. "I learned this from my grandmother. Breathe deeply, slowly." At first, Ethan tensed beneath her touch, as if unfamiliar with contact. Gradually, she felt his body relax, his breathing slow, and he synced with her rhythm. "I've had this since I was a kid," he whispered so quietly, she had to lean in to hear. "Every time a storm hits, or when things aren't right." Aaliyah paused for a moment, her heart tightening. His words, though brief, cracked open a door to a past she didn't know. "When things aren't right?" she asked gently, not wanting to shatter the fragile moment. Ethan opened his eyes and looked at her. His gray eyes were no longer icy in the dim light, but filled with invisible cracks. "It doesn't matter," he said, though his voice lacked its usual firmness. "You don't have to do this." "But I want to," Aaliyah replied, touching his neck. "No one should endure pain alone." She paused, then added, "Not even you." "Ethan." He didn't reply, but he didn't pull away either. They sat in the dark study, with only the sound of rain and their shared breathing. Suddenly, the chandelier flickered back to life, signaling the generator's return. Ethan winced at the brightness, and Aaliyah quickly stood, rushing to dim the lights. When she turned back, he was already on his feet, his mask of control back in place, but something in his eyes had changed, if only slightly. Thank you, he said, his tone stiff as though gratitude embarrassed him. You should go back to your room. The storm's almost over. Aaliyah nodded, but before leaving, she looked at him and said sincerely, If there's another storm, I'll come back. Not because of the contract, but because I don't want you to be alone. She left without waiting for a reply, but as the door closed, she heard a faint sigh escape Ethan, like the release of a burden long held. Back in her room, Aaliyah lay down, her heart still racing. The storm outside had eased, but another storm was brewing inside her. The realization that Ethan Caldwell, known as the Soulless One, might also be fighting demons of his own. And for the first time she wondered, could she be the one to help him face them? Or was she only fooling herself within this gilded cage? Early summer sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the Caldwell estate, casting golden light over the blooming red roses in the vast garden. Aaliyah Carter sat in the library, a medical textbook open on the table, but her gaze wandered beyond the pages, lost somewhere outside. 2 weeks had passed since the stormy night, and she and Ethan had settled into a strange rhythm, not quite distant, but not yet close. Their dinners now included a few brief exchanges, and sometimes she caught Ethan's gaze lingering on her longer than usual, as if he were trying to solve a mystery. A gentle knock at the door pulled Aaliyah from her thoughts. Mrs. Harris, the housekeeper, with the ever-warm smile, appeared at the threshold. Mrs. Caldwell, she said, a hint of excitement in her voice. You have visitors. They're waiting in the main sitting room. Aaliyah frowned in surprise. Visitors who? She didn't know anyone in New York, and Ethan had been firm about maintaining privacy during this adjustment period, as he called it. Mrs. Harris's smile widened. Your mother and younger brother, ma'am. Mr. Caldwell arranged their visit. Aaliyah's heart skipped a beat. She shot up the book, slipping to the floor unnoticed. My mother, Malik. Without waiting for confirmation, she rushed from the library heels, echoing against the marble floors, her heart racing with emotion. Pushing open the doors to the sitting room, she found her mother, Grace Carter, looking healthier than ever, and her 19-year-old brother, Malik, gazing in awe at the grand chandelier above. Aaliyah. Grace opened her arms wide, her radiant smile banishing the worry lines once etched into her face. Aaliyah rushed into her embrace, tears brimming as she clutched them both. I can't believe this, she whispered hoarsely. How are you and Malik here? Malik, now taller than she remembered, grinned. Ask your husband. He sent a car to Chicago and handled everything from the plane tickets to Mom's meds. He even called to make sure she packed enough warm clothes. Stunned, Aaliyah turned to Grace. Her mother nodded, eyes warm. Mr. Caldwell called me last week. He said you might be homesick, that you needed familiar faces. He also arranged for me to see a specialist here. Aaliyah, you found someone thoughtful. Thoughtful. Aaliyah repeated, her head spinning. Ethan had never mentioned any of this. She thought of him, the man with the icy eyes on their wedding night, the one trembling in pain during the storm, and wondered why he would do this without telling her. That afternoon passed in the cozy sitting room, where Mrs. Harris served tea and pastries. Grace shared updates on her cancer treatment, thanks to the top-tier doctor Ethan had hired. I feel like I've come back to life, she said, squeezing Aaliyah's hand. Malik, bubbling with excitement, spoke about his first weeks at a prestigious university on a full scholarship funded by the Caldwell Foundation. You won't believe it. They've got a high-tech lab. I'm going to study engineering just like Mr. Caldwell. Aaliyah smiled, but inside, a storm brewed. She was relieved her family was safe, but Ethan's generosity unsettled her. Was this part of the contract? Or did he genuinely care for her more than he let on? That evening, Ethan arrived earlier than usual for dinner, wearing a deep gray suit and his brown hair neatly combed. He nodded politely to Grace and Malik, his expression softening slightly as his gaze fell on Aaliyah, I hope the trip wasn't too exhausting, he said, settling at the head of the table. Not at all, Mr. Caldwell. Grace replied sincerely. Thank you for everything. Not just for today, but for what you've done for our family. Ethan waved her thanks away, as if brushing off praise. It was the right thing to do, he said evenly. But when he looked at Aaliyah, she saw something flicker in his eyes. Not the usual coldness, but a rare glimpse of honesty. Dinner was more pleasant than Aaliyah expected. Ethan asked Malik about the school, listened attentively, and even offered thoughtful advice about engineering. With Grace, he chatted about Chicago, making her laugh when he mentioned the bustling markets she once loved. Aaliyah observed him surprised at how natural he seemed, but then Malik, always more perceptive than his easygoing nature suggested, turned to her directly. Are you okay, sis? He asked, voice quieter. I mean, are you happy? The room fell into sudden silence. Aaliyah felt Ethan's gaze on her heavy with an unspoken question. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I'm okay, Malik, she said, slightly trembling. It's just all so new. Ethan, he's been good to me. Malik nodded, though concern still clouded his eyes. Grace squeezed Aaliyah's hand beneath the table, offering silent strength. Ethan lowered his gaze to his plate, but Aaliyah noticed how his hand tightened around the silverware, as if her answer had struck a nerve. After dinner, as Grace and Malik were shown to their guest rooms, Aaliyah lingered in the hallway with Ethan. Why didn't you tell me? She asked, her voice quiet but firm. About bringing my mom and brother here? Ethan looked at her, his expression unreadable. I thought it would make you happier if it were a surprise, he said calmly. You've been away from them too long. Aaliyah shook her head, her emotions tangled. You didn't have to do that. The contract doesn't require you to care about how I feel. Ethan stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Maybe I want to do more than what the contract requires. He paused, locking eyes with her. You deserve to be happy, Aaliyah, whether you believe that or not. Before she could respond, he walked into his study, closing the door behind him. Aaliyah stood there, her heart pounding. His words echoed in her mind like a riddle with no clear answer. This man with his icy shell and hidden past had just done something that made her feel seen, valued. But why? And why, despite everything, did a small flicker of hope spark within her? Even as she knew this gilded cage might never open. Night fell over New York, and the Grand Astoria Hotel gleamed like a jewel in the heart of Manhattan. Aaliyah Carter stood before the mirror in the luxurious dressing room of the Caldwell estate. The deep wine-red evening gown hugged her curves, accentuating her glowing brown skin. Her curly hair was styled in an elegant updo, adorned with sparkling crystals, but the look in her eyes reflected anxiety. Tonight would be her first public appearance, besides Ethan Caldwell, as Mrs. Caldwell, at a charity gala, hosted by his company, a world of high society, to which she had never belonged. Ethan appeared in the doorway, his black tuxedo emphasizing his tall frame and chiseled features. He paused, his gray eyes scanning her, and for a fleeting moment, a flicker, perhaps admiration, passed through them before he masked it. Are you ready? He asked, his deep voice lacking the iciness it once carried. Aaliyah took a deep breath, trying to bury her nervousness. I'm not sure I'll ever be ready for a place like this, she admitted, smoothing her dress. But I'll try. Ethan stepped forward, offering his arm. Just be yourself, he said, eyes locked on hers. That's all I need. His words, simple as they were, carried a weight that made her heart race. She placed her hand on his arm, feeling the warmth through the fabric, and together they left the estate, stepping into the blinding flashes of photographers waiting outside the hotel. Inside the grand ballroom, The atmosphere was dazzling. Crystal chandeliers glittered overhead. Marble floors reflected every light, and elegantly dressed guests mingled over champagne. But Aaliyah immediately sensed the stares curious, even scrutinizing. As a black woman in a sea of wealthy white faces, she felt like an outsider, as if every eye was judging her not for who she was, but for daring to stand beside Ethan Caldwell. Ethan, there you are. An older man with silver hair and an air of authority approached, patting Ethan on the shoulder with forced familiarity. And this must be the mysterious Mrs. Caldwell the whole city's been buzzing about. He turned to Aaliyah with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. George Langley, CEO of Langley Enterprises. A pleasure. Aaliyah shook his hand, noting the limp grip. Aaliyah Carter, she replied calmly, though her heart thudded. Nice to meet you. You're quite the surprise, George said, his gaze lingering with barely disguised curiosity. No one even knew Ethan was dating. And then bam, a wedding. Very romantic, wouldn't you say? Before Aaliyah could respond, a woman in a shimmering silver dress approached, linking her arm with George. Don't monopolize the newlyweds, darling, she said sweetly, though her tone was cold. Evelyn Langley, an old friend of Ethan's. The way she emphasized friend sent a chill through Aaliyah. With her golden hair and regal poise, Evelyn looked at Aaliyah as if she were a handbag to be appraised. I used to be a nurse, Aaliyah said, in response to George's unspoken question about her background, her voice clear. Before, life brought me here. Nurse Evelyn repeated, raising a perfectly arched brow. How noble. Though I suppose caring for others is useful when married to someone as demanding as Ethan. She threw Ethan a knowing glance, her smile dripping with innuendo. Aaliyah felt heat rise to her cheeks, but kept her voice steady. Any relationship requires care, Mrs. Langley, especially when people genuinely care about each other. Beside her, Ethan placed his hand on the small of her back, a subtle but unmistakable gesture of protection. If you'll excuse us, he said, his tone glacial. We have more guests to greet. He led Aaliyah away, but not before she caught Evelyn whispering to George. Ask him about Emily. That girl's going to learn Ethan never truly loves anyone. The name Emily struck Aaliyah like a blade. She glanced at Ethan, but his face remained unreadable, though the hand on her back gripped more firmly. When they reached a quiet corner of the ballroom, she couldn't hold back. Who's Emily? She asked, her voice low but firm. Ethan paused, his expression darkening. No one important, he said stiffly. Just the past. The past seems quite important to Mrs. Langley. Aaliyah pressed. If I'm your wife, don't I have the right to know? He looked at her, his eyes flickering between anger and a pain she couldn't name. You want the truth, he said, voice low. Evelyn chased me for years because of my money. She never knew me, and she didn't know Emily. Don't let their venom get to you. Aaliyah wanted to ask more, but Ethan's eyes were a wall. He guided her back to the crowd, his hand never leaving her back, as though shielding her from whispers and judgmental stares. Throughout the evening, Aaliyah found strength she didn't know she had, answering curious questions with poise and wit. But inside her thoughts swirled around one name, Emily, and the man beside her, who had just protected her from the world, yet kept secrets locked inside. Ethan spoke unexpectedly when they finally left the gala, riding in the sleek Bentley through the quiet city streets. You handled that better than I expected, he said, a hint of surprise in his voice. They thought you'd crack under pressure, but you silenced them. Aaliyah looked at him, her eyes steady. I grew up in the projects, Ethan. The judgment of the elite doesn't scare me, but I don't like being left in the dark. If I need to know something about you or Emily, I want to hear it from you. Ethan stayed silent, His gaze fixed out the window where the city lights blurred like falling stars. "Some things aren't worth digging up," he said, his voice rough. "But if you want the truth, be patient. I'm not good at opening up." Aaliyah nodded, feeling as though she had just nudged open a door. She didn't know who Emily was, but she knew one thing. A cold, powerful, and deeply guarded man was carrying a wound she hadn't yet touched. And as she looked at him in the darkened car, her heart beat with something unexpected. Not just curiosity, but a yearning to understand, to step into the world he kept hidden. A thin morning mist blanketed the Caldwell estate, shrouding the rose garden, where Aaliyah Carter often sought refuge from her tangled thoughts. 3 weeks had passed since the charity gala, yet the name Emily still haunted her like a ghost. Ethan Caldwell, though still emotionally distant, had begun to open up, sharing stories about work, asking about her dream of becoming a nurse. But every time she mentioned Emily, he shut down like a steel door. Aaliyah knew something more profound was buried there, and she was determined not to let it become a permanent wall between them. The doorbell rang unexpectedly, pulling her from her reading in the library. Mrs. Harris appeared, her usually warm expression now tinged with concern. "Mrs. Caldwell," she said quietly, "you have visitors at the gate. They claim to be Mr. Caldwell's parents. I've tried to reach him, but he's in a meeting in the city and hasn't responded." Aaliyah set the book down, surprised. Ethan had never spoken of his parents as if they didn't exist. "His parents," she repeated, rising. "What do they want?" Mrs. Harris shook her head. "They're persistent. Security can't hold them off much longer. I'm unsure how Mr. Caldwell will react, but you should meet them first." Aaliyah drew a deep breath, as though stepping into dangerous terrain. "All right," she said firmly. "Let them in. I'll receive them." Though filled with questions, she knew this might be a chance to understand Ethan and Emily better. 20 minutes later, Aaliyah sat across from Ronald and Linda Caldwell in the grand parlor. Ronald, a heavy-set man with a ruddy face and a wrinkled suit, glanced around the lavish room with barely concealed envy. Linda, thin and overly made up, her blonde hair dyed, studied Aaliyah as if she were a puzzle. "So you're the girl who married our son, Linda," said shrilly. "We had to read about the wedding in the business section. No phone call, no invitation." Aaliyah kept her tone calm, though her heart pounded. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't know Ethan hadn't told you. I'm Aaliyah Carter." Ronald snorted, slumping into the chair. "Ethan hasn't said a word to us in 15 years, ever since he decided he was too good for his parents with that fancy scholarship and his tech empire." "Not exactly," Linda interjected, though her tone lacked conviction. "He still sends money monthly, as if that could make up for abandoning his family." A heavy tension hung in the air, as though a dark secret was on the verge of exploding. "I'm sure Ethan will be home soon," Aaliyah offered, trying to keep the peace. "Maybe we should—" "Oh, he'll try to avoid us," Ronald cut in bitterly. "That's why we didn't call ahead. I had to ambush him. Look at this place." He gestured around the room. "We raised him in a 2-bedroom apartment, and now he lives like a king. Do you even know that girl?" Aaliyah clenched her hands, feeling like she was being pulled into a swamp. Before she could respond, footsteps echoed, and Ethan appeared in the doorway, his face set in stone. His storm-gray eyes scanned his parents with a coldness that made Aaliyah shiver. "Aaliyah," he said, his voice low but sharp. "I'll handle this. You don't need to be here." But Aaliyah didn't move. She saw the flicker of pain in his eyes, even though he tried to hide it. "I want to stay," she said firmly. "They're your family." "Family?" Ronald scoffed, rising to his feet. "That's what you call us after this boy turned his back on us for money. Ask him about Emily the girl. Ask what he did to his sister." The name Emily struck the room like a bolt of lightning. Ethan stepped forward, his eyes blazing with rare fury. "Don't you dare say her name," he growled, his voice shaking. "You have no right." Linda burst into tears, though her sobs felt theatrical. "How can you say that? Ethan, we sacrificed so much for you. For Emily." "Sacrificed?" Ethan snapped, his voice like a blade. "You took the money I sent for Emily's treatment and spent it on cars, casinos, vacations. She died because of you, not because of me." Aaliyah felt her heart twist. She stood and placed a hand gently on Ethan's arm, trying to steady him. "Ethan," she said softly, "please, tell me, who was Emily?" Ethan turned to her, his eyes filled with raw pain, as if she had touched a wound that had never healed. He took a deep breath and faced his parents again. "Leave," he ordered, voice ice cold. "This month's payment will arrive as usual. But don't come back, and don't ever disturb my wife again." Ronald opened his mouth to protest, but Ethan's glare silenced him. Linda mumbled something about injustice, dabbing at her eyes as security escorted them out. When the door finally closed, a heavy silence settled over the room. Ethan stood still, his back to Aaliyah, his shoulders taut. "Ethan," Aaliyah called gently, stepping closer. "Tell me. I need to understand." He didn't respond right away. Eventually he turned around, his eyes red but still trying to remain composed. "Emily was my little sister," he said hoarsely. "She died 15 years ago from leukemia. I was 19, studying on scholarship. When she was diagnosed, I dropped out, worked 3 jobs, and lived like a ghost to send money home for her treatment. But my parents—" He trailed off, clenching his fists. "They spent it all. When I found out, it was too late. Emily died, and I've never forgiven them or myself." Tears welled in Aaliyah's eyes. She stepped forward and took his hand, feeling it tremble in hers. "It wasn't your fault," she said firmly. "You did everything you could. They were the adults, they were responsible." Ethan shook his head, trying to pull away, but Aaliyah held on. "I should have been there," he whispered. "She called me her hero, but I failed her." Aaliyah pulled him closer, locking eyes with him. "You didn't fail," she said, voice quivering with emotion. "You fought for her, and now you're still fighting for other kids through the Caldwell Foundation. Emily would be proud of you, Ethan." For a brief moment, Ethan's icy exterior shattered. He looked at her with an expression of deep pain and a fragile glimmer of hope. "Why do you care?" he asked, barely above a whisper. "After everything I've done, the contract, the way I treated you, why are you still here?" Aaliyah gave a bittersweet smile, her hand still holding his. "Because I see the real you, no matter how hard you try to hide him. And because I don't want you to hurt alone." Ethan said nothing, but he didn't pull away. They stood together in the vast parlor, like survivors of a storm. When Aaliyah finally left, giving him space to face his memories, she knew something had shifted. A door had opened. Not wide, but enough for light to seep through. And in her heart, a quiet hope stirred, perhaps within this gilded cage, she and Ethan might one day heal together. June sunlight poured through the large glass panels of the newly built Pediatric Cancer Center, where colorful murals of elephants and rainbows softened the hospital atmosphere. Aaliyah Carter stood among the crowd of guests, her heart filled with pride, as she watched Ethan Caldwell step up to the podium. Today was the groundbreaking ceremony for the center funded by the Caldwell Foundation, a project Aaliyah now knew was a memorial for Emily, Ethan's late younger sister. Since the confrontation with his parents a month ago, Ethan had begun to open up more, sharing little stories about Emily, her smile, her love for books, but still kept a part of his heart tightly locked. Dressed in a deep navy suit, Ethan looked dignified, though no longer as cold as before. Every child deserves to live, he said, his deep voice echoing through the hall. This center will offer cutting-edge treatment opportunities to families who can't afford it, so no one has to lose a loved one because of money. The crowd applauded, but Aaliyah noticed the faraway look in Ethan's eyes, as if he were speaking directly to Emily. She sat in the front row, her simple yet elegant sapphire blue dress complementing her glowing brown skin. She felt the curious glances of donors and hospital staff, a black woman from the slums of Chicago, standing beside a white billionaire like Ethan Caldwell. But today, she didn't care. She was proud to be here witnessing Ethan's dream come true. The ceremony continued with a speech by Dr. Robert Harper, a renowned oncologist. He stepped up to the podium, his silver hair and warm smile commanding quiet. "It's an honor to be part of this center," he began, voice gentle. "And I'm not surprised by Ethan Caldwell's generosity. I've known him and his family for years when they faced difficult choices to save young Emily." Aaliyah felt Ethan tense beside her. His hand, which had been holding hers, tightened to the point of pain. His face remained still, but his eyes darkened, as if a storm were gathering inside. Dr. Harper continued, seemingly unaware of the shift. "If we had today's technology back then, maybe Emily would have had a chance. It was a tragedy, but today, thanks to Ethan's vision, we are changing the future." The crowd applauded, but Aaliyah's focus was solely on Ethan. He released her hand and walked briskly out of the hall, leaving the congratulations and camera flashes behind. She followed, heart-pounding, ignoring the curious stares. She found him in the parking lot, standing beside the Bentley, leaning against the hood, his breath short and uneven. He was on the phone, his voice like ice. "Remove him from the board. I don't care about the backlash. Do it now." Ethan ended the call when he saw Aaliyah. His eyes burned with anger. "Not now, Aaliyah," he said sharply, but she didn't back down. "What just happened?" she asked, stepping closer. "Why did you react that way when Dr. Harper mentioned Emily?" Ethan turned away, fists clenched. "He lied," he growled, his voice shaking. "My parents didn't face difficult choices. They had the money to save Emily, the money I sent them, but they spent it on worthless things. Harper knew. He was Emily's doctor, and he covered for them. Said her condition was too advanced, that treatment would be useless." Aaliyah felt her heart twist. She stepped forward, laying a hand on his arm, feeling his body wound tight like a wire. "You didn't believe him, did you?" she asked gently. Ethan shook his head, eyes red. "I didn't, not until years later, when I had enough money to access Emily's medical records. Harper was right by then. It was too late. But if I had been there and hadn't unquestioningly trusted my parents, maybe I could have bought her more time. I was her brother, Aaliyah. I promised I'd save her, and I failed." His voice cracked, and Aaliyah couldn't hold back. She pulled him into her arms, hugging him tightly despite the stiffness of his tailored suit. "No, Ethan," she said firmly, tears welling up. "You didn't fail. You were 19, working 3 jobs, living like a ghost to save your sister. Your parents were the adults, they were responsible, not you." Ethan stiffened in her embrace, as if unfamiliar with comfort. But slowly, he wrapped his arms around her, holding her like she was a lifeline in the middle of a storm. "I promised her," he whispered into her hair. "I said, 'Don't worry, Emily. I'll save you.' But I didn't." Aaliyah lifted her face to his, looking him in the eye. "You are saving her, Ethan," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Every child treated at this center is part of Emily. You're turning your pain into hope for thousands. She would be proud of you, and so am I." Her words shattered something invisible between them. Ethan looked at her, his eyes filled with pain, but also with a new light gratitude perhaps. or something more profound? Without thinking, he leaned down and kissed her soft, emotional, their first kiss. Not out of duty or contract, but born from a genuine connection, like two souls finding each other amid sorrow. When they pulled apart, Ethan rested his forehead against hers, their breaths mingling. "I don't deserve you," he whispered, voice rough. "But I don't want to lose you." Aaliyah smiled, her hand cupping his cheek. "You're not losing me," she said softly. "We'll get through this together, Ethan." Starting here, they stood in the quiet parking lot, sunlight filtering through the trees, as if the world had paused to give them a moment to breathe. Aaliyah knew this wasn't the end of the pain, but the beginning of something new. No longer a gilded cage, but a home they could build together. Moonlight spilled through the window of the Caldwell estate's main bedroom, casting a silver sheen over the wide bed, now shared by Aaliyah Carter and Ethan Caldwell. 1 month had passed since their first kiss at the Pediatric Cancer Center, and their lives had shifted. Ethan, once the cold man of contracts, now often came home early, shared dinners with Aaliyah, and listened as she spoke about her dreams of becoming a nurse. They had begun sleeping in the same room, a natural progression after countless late-night conversations, where Ethan slowly opened up about his past, and Aaliyah shared her fears. But even with their growing closeness, an invisible distance still lingered. Ethan kept the deepest corners of his heart tightly sealed, and Aaliyah sometimes wondered if she truly belonged in his world. That morning, Aaliyah awoke in Ethan's arms, his warmth easing the cool bite of a New York summer morning. He had transformed a spare room into a study for her, filled with medical textbooks and a new laptop, so she could continue her online nursing program. "I want you to chase your dream," he had said when giving her the gift, his gray eyes sincere. Aaliyah was moved, but also burdened. How could a girl from the Chicago slums ever be worthy of everything he gave her? She was reading a textbook in her study when Mrs. Harris knocked, her usually warm face etched with concern. "Mrs. Caldwell," she said, handing Aaliyah a tabloid. "I think you should see this." Aaliyah took the paper, and her heart sank at the headline, "Gold Digger of Color, the Shocking Truth Behind Ethan Caldwell's Marriage." The article, citing an anonymous source, insinuated that Aaliyah had married Ethan to upgrade her life and for a racial experiment. Lines like, "Ms. Carter, a slum-born opportunist, clearly knows how to seize a payday, and Ethan will tire of her soon, just like he did." The others made Aaliyah feel exposed and humiliated. Worse still, the article hinted that Ethan had a pattern, that she was just another fleeting infatuation. Aaliyah clenched the paper, fury and hurt twisting inside her. She knew exactly who was behind it: Evelyn Langley, the woman who had sneered at her during the charity gala. Evelyn, with her icy stares and venom-laced words, clearly couldn't accept a black woman standing beside Ethan. But what hurt Aaliyah most wasn't the slander. It was the fear that maybe, just maybe, she truly didn't belong in his world, that she wasn't good enough. That evening at dinner, Aaliyah was quieter than usual, avoiding Ethan's eyes. He noticed instantly and set down his utensils. "What's wrong?" he asked, voice low but firm. "You're not yourself." Aaliyah took a deep breath and slid the paper across the table. "This," she said, her voice trembling. "All of New York is calling me a gold digger. They think I'm here for your money, that I'm not worthy." Ethan skimmed the article, his jaw tightening, a rare fury flashing in his eyes. "Evelyn," he growled, tossing the paper aside. "I'll handle this. She'll pay for coming after you." "It's not just Evelyn," Aaliyah said, her voice cracking. "She's only saying what everyone else thinks. I'm a black girl from the slums, Ethan. When they look at me, they see someone who doesn't belong. And sometimes," her voice broke, Sometimes I'm afraid they're right. I'm afraid I'm not good enough for you, not white enough. Her confession sliced through the air like a knife. Ethan rose, walked around the table and knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "Aaliyah," he said, voice steady, but full of feeling. "You are the strongest, smartest, and most genuine woman I've ever met. You don't just belong here. You're the reason I want this place to feel like home. The world out there, people like Evelyn, they don't deserve you. And if anyone here isn't good enough, it's me for dragging you into this chaos." Tears streamed down Aaliyah's face. "But why Ethan?" she whispered. "Why did you choose me? You could have anyone, someone like Evelyn, someone who fits your world. Why me?" Ethan gave a sad smile, his hand gently brushing her cheek, wiping away her tears. "Because you remind me of myself," he said hoarsely. "You sacrificed everything for your family like I did for Emily. But more than that, Aaliyah, you have a heart I've never found in anyone else in this artificial world. Looking at you, I see someone who makes me want to live, not just exist." His words were like a warm breeze chasing away the shadows inside her. She leaned down her lips, finding his in a deep, tender kiss, not just of passion, but of promise. A vow that they would face the world together. When they pulled apart, Aaliyah rested her head against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat echoing her own. "We'll get through this, won't we?" she asked softly, hope flickering in her voice. Ethan wrapped his arms tightly around her, his voice unwavering. Together, he said, "I won't let anyone hurt you, Aaliyah. Never." That night, as they lay beside each other, moonlight bathing Ethan's peaceful face, Aaliyah knew their love was growing more substantial than the gossip and more profound than the prejudice. But deep down, she knew this was only the beginning of their battle. Evelyn Langley and the world outside wouldn't let go so easily. But for the first time, Aaliyah didn't feel like she was fighting alone. She had Ethan, and that was all she needed to face the coming storm. Soft sunlight filtered through the hallway of the children's hospital, where murals of elephants and rainbows brought warmth to the sterile air. Aaliyah Carter held Ethan Caldwell's hand, her heart pounding as they followed Melissa, a social worker, toward the playroom. 2 months had passed since their first kiss, and the whirlwind of rumors ignited by Evelyn Langley. Their love had only grown stronger. They now shared quiet moments, candlelit dinners, conversations about dreams, and Aaliyah could feel Ethan slowly shedding his icy shell, revealing a heart scarred but capable of deep love. Today, they were here to meet Nia, a 7-year-old black girl orphaned in a car accident and recently cured of leukemia with the help of the Caldwell Foundation. Aaliyah had read Nia's file, how she'd bounced between foster homes since losing her parents, how she'd fought leukemia since she was 5. When Melissa suggested they meet Nia, Aaliyah felt an instant connection. This little girl like her had grown up in hardship and needed love to heal. Ethan had hesitated at first, but relented when he saw the determination in Aaliyah's eyes. "If you think we can give her a home," he had said, "then I believe you." Melissa stopped at the playroom door and turned to them with a gentle smile. "Nia, remember the people I told you about?" she called softly. "They're here to meet you." Nia looked up from the art table, her dark eyes sharp with caution, yet brimming with intelligence. She was petite, her braids neat and tight, coloring a picture of a family. 3 people holding hands beneath a bright sun. Aaliyah felt her heart squeeze as she sensed the hurt behind Nia's brave little front. Ethan knelt to eye level, his voice softer than usual. "Hi, Nia," he said. "I'm Ethan, and this is my wife, Aaliyah. It's so nice to meet you." Nia studied them, eyes wary. Your hospital made me better, she said, her voice small but clear. Miss Melissa said you have a big house. Is that true? Aaliyah smiled and sat beside Ethan. It's true, she said. But it's too big for just two people. We need someone to help fill it with joy. Naya tilted her head, considering. If I come, she asked cautiously, do I have to call you Mom and Dad immediately? I don't want to call anyone that anymore. The question stabbed at Aaliyah's heart. She glanced at Ethan and saw a flicker of pain in his eyes, perhaps a memory of Emily. You don't have to call us anything, Ethan said gently. You can call me Ethan, and call Aaliyah whatever you want. What matters is that you feel safe and loved. Nia looked back at her, drawing her finger tracing the three figures. I had a family, she whispered. Then they were gone. If I come with you and I get sick again, will you leave me too? Aaliyah blinked back tears. She reached for Nia's hand, holding it gently, but firmly. No, Nia, she said, voice trembling with emotion. We'll be there no matter what. I'm a nurse. I know how to take care of you. And Ethan, he built that hospital to help girls like you. We want you to be part of our family, not because of a contract or obligation, but because we love you. Nia looked from Aaliyah to Ethan. Her eyes softened. She slid her drawing across the table. I made this, she said quietly. It's a family. If I come with you, will it be like this? Ethan took the picture, his eyes tender. It'll be even better, he said hoarsely. We'll do everything we can to make you happy. At that moment, Aaliyah knew Naya belonged with them, and they belonged with her. But the path to adoption wouldn't be easy. Days later at the social services office, they faced a stern woman named Mrs. Foster, who eyed them suspiciously. Mr. Caldwell, she said sharply, you're a billionaire with a notoriously private lifestyle, Mrs. Carter. You come from a disadvantaged background and have never been a parent. Why should we believe you aren't adopting Nia for publicity, especially considering you're the primary donor to the hospital that treated her? Aaliyah felt heat rise to her cheeks. We love Nia, she said firmly. I grew up in the slums, Mrs. Foster, so I understand what she's been through. I know what it's like to lose everything and need a home. We're not doing this for image, we're doing it because she deserves a family. Ethan squeezed her hand under the table, his eyes locked on Mrs. Foster's. I lost my sister to leukemia, he said, his voice low but unwavering. I built that hospital so no child would have to suffer like she did. Nia isn't a PR stunt. She's why I want to be a father, to give her a chance my sister never had. Mrs. Foster was silent for a moment, her expression softening. The process will take time, she warned. We must ensure Nia's best interests come first. Aaliyah nodded, her heart ablaze with determination. She would fight for Nia, just like she had fought for her own family. Back at the estate that night, Aaliyah and Ethan sat in the library with Nia's drawing on the table before them. Do you think we can do this? Ethan asked, his voice uncertain. A rare vulnerability. Be parents. Aaliyah smiled and took his hand. We've survived contract scandals and your past, she said. We can do anything as long as we do it together. Nia needs us, and I think we need her too. Ethan pulled her into his arms and kissed her forehead. You're right, he whispered. You're always right. As they sat there, moonlight shining down on Nia's picture, Aaliyah felt a fierce new hope rise in her chest. She knew the journey ahead would be filled with prejudice and legal hurdles. But with Ethan by her side, she was ready for anything. The garden at the Caldwell estate shimmered under lantern light and white roses, a fairy tale tableau in the middle of a New York summer night. Aaliyah Carter stood before the mirror, adjusting a simple white dress that hugged her figure. It wasn't as glamorous as the wedding gown from a year ago, but it held something deeper: honesty and intimacy. Today marked her and Ethan Caldwell's first wedding anniversary. But this wasn't just a celebration. It was a reaffirmation ceremony, a vow to declare before loved ones that what began as a cold contract had blossomed into a true love story. 3 months had passed since the decision to adopt Nia, and life had shifted in beautiful, unexpected ways. Nia, the radiant 7-year-old with a gap-toothed smile, had brought laughter and light into the mansion. Though the adoption process was still underway with scheduled visits and intense assessments from social services, Nia had already begun calling Aaliyah Ali and Ethan E nicknames that melted their hearts. Once the emotionally distant empty man Ethan could now be found running barefoot through the garden with Nia, a softness in him that only love and healing could create. Aaliyah entered the garden, where guests had gathered her mother Grace, her younger brother Malik, Mrs. Harris, and a few close friends. Dressed in a pink rose print dress, Nia dashed toward her with outstretched arms. "Ali, you look so pretty," she squealed, her dark eyes sparkling. Aaliyah laughed, stroking her hair. "Thank you, my little angel." Ethan stood beneath a rose-covered archway, his gray suit sharp against his tall frame. When he saw Aaliyah, his eyes lit up with unabashed love. He took her hand and led her to the garden's center, where a friendly officiant waited. "Are you sure about this?" Ethan whispered, a hint of nerves in his voice. "We don't have to do it if you're not ready." Aaliyah squeezed his hand, smiling. "I've never been more sure," she said. "I want the world to know we love each other, not because of a contract, but because of our hearts." The ceremony began simple, but drenched in emotion. Ethan spoke first, his deep voice steady, but laced with feeling, echoing through the quiet garden. "A year ago, I offered you a contract, a transaction I believed would give me control," he said, his gaze locked on Aaliyah. "But you shattered every plan I had. You taught me how to love, forgive, and be true to myself. Aaliyah, you are not just my wife. You are my home, the reason I wake up every morning." Tears welled in the crowd's eyes. Grace dabbed her cheeks. Malik beamed with pride. Aaliyah inhaled deeply, her voice trembling but strong. "When I married you, I thought I was giving up my freedom," she said. "But you gave me so much more: a family, a purpose, a love I never dared to dream of. Ethan, you are the most deeply hearted man I've ever known, and I vow to love you and build our future together with Nia and the dreams we now share." Standing beside them, Nia squealed with joy as they exchanged simple silver bands, engraved with the words, "From contract to forever." When the officiant pronounced them renewed in love, Ethan leaned in and kissed Aaliyah, a kiss tender yet fierce, a wordless vow. The guests applauded, but a cold voice sliced through the air. "How touching." Evelyn Langley stepped from the shadows, her crimson gown a flame of arrogance and venom. But all of New York knows this is just theater. A girl from the slums and a billionaire who believes that fairy tale murmurs rippled through the crowd. Grace grabbed Malik's hand to stop him from reacting. Aaliyah felt heat rise in her face, but she stood tall, her eyes unwavering. "Ms. Langley," she said clearly, "our love doesn't need your approval or anyone's. If you find it unbelievable, that's your problem, not ours." Evelyn sneered and turned to Ethan. "Does she even know about Emily? Or does she believe she's special, someone who can change a man who doesn't know how to love?" Ethan stepped forward, his gaze like steel. "That's enough, Evelyn," he growled. "You know nothing about Emily, and even less about Aaliyah. She's the woman I love who gave me a family and a future. You, Evelyn, live off rumors and envy." Evelyn's face went pale, but before she could respond, Nia rushed forward and clung to Aaliyah's leg. "Don't make Ali sad," she cried, glaring up at Evelyn. "Ali and E are my family." The garden fell silent for a heartbeat. Then Grace began clapping, followed by Malik and everyone else. Evelyn, now isolated and humiliated, turned and fled into the night. Aaliyah knelt and hugged Nia tightly, tears spilling down her cheeks. Ethan rested a hand on both of them, his face radiant with pride. The celebration continued with laughter and music. Nia danced with Malik. Grace chatted warmly with Mrs. Harris. Later, after the guests had left, Aaliyah and Ethan stood on the terrace overlooking the glowing garden. "I'm sorry about Evelyn," Ethan murmured. "I didn't think she'd show up." Aaliyah leaned into him, smiling softly. "She doesn't matter," she said. "What matters is us, you, me, and Nia. We're a family, Ethan, and no one can take that away." He kissed her hair, his voice tender. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Aaliyah. Thank you for not giving up on me." They stood there under the moonlight, hearts entwined in a silent promise. Aaliyah knew their journey wasn't over, the Adoption Society's prejudice, more battles ahead, but with Ethan and Nia by her side, she felt invincible. What began as a cold contract had become eternal love, and no flashbulb or whispered judgment could ever undo that. The golden hue of sunset bathed the Caldwell Estates garden in warm light, where Nia's laughter echoed through rose bushes and quiet breezes. Aaliyah Carter sat on a bench, a medical textbook open on her lap, though her eyes were fixed on Nia, now officially her and Ethan Caldwell's daughter. 6 months had passed since their vow renewal, and after grueling rounds of social worker visits and public scrutiny, the adoption was finalized. Today their family was whole. The mansion no longer felt like a gilded cage. It was now a home. Aaliyah smiled as she watched Ethan's sleeves rolled up playing tag with Nia. Once known as the empty man of New York's business world, Ethan was now a devoted father, his face lighting up every time Nia called him E. He had reduced his workload, delegating more to his executive team to spend time with family, a move that surprised even Aaliyah and her mother, Grace. Grace, now fully recovered from cancer, thanks to treatment funded by Ethan, visited frequently, bringing homemade Chicago dishes Nia adored. Malik, Aaliyah's younger brother, now a college sophomore, had stepped into the significant brother role, teaching Nia how to shoot hoops in the backyard. Aaliyah was now a registered nurse at the Caldwell Foundation's Pediatric Cancer Center, specializing in oncology care. Her work was not just a calling, but a tribute to Nia's journey and Emily, Ethan's late sister. She often brought Nia to the hospital, where the little girl loved handing out juice boxes to other young patients, her smile a ray of light in rooms filled with pain. Despite his continued involvement in philanthropic projects, Ethan made it a point to attend hospital events, eyes gleaming with pride whenever he watched Aaliyah in action. But this path to joy hadn't been easy. Social prejudice still lingered, the lingering stares when they walked with Nia, the occasional tabloids rehashing the girl from the slums and the white billionaire. Silenced after the vow renewal, Evelyn Langley had retreated from Ethan's social circles, but the sting of her words left shadows behind. Aaliyah once worried that the rumors would hurt Nia, but the little girl, bearing Aaliyah's same quiet resilience, only shrugged. "They can say what they want, Ali. I've got you and E. That's all that matters." One evening, as stars shimmered over the New York skyline, Aaliyah, Ethan, and Nia lay on a blanket in the garden, stargazing through the telescope Ethan had gifted her. "Look," Nia gasped, "a shooting star." "Make a wish, Ali," Aaliyah laughed, closing her eyes. But deep down, she knew she didn't need to wish. She already had everything she dreamed of. When she opened her eyes again, she found Nia staring at her, worry creeping into her tiny features. "Ali," Nia asked quietly, "if I get sick again, will you and E still love me?" The question sliced through Aaliyah's chest, unearthing old pain buried beneath hope. She knelt, holding Nia close. "Nia, no matter what happens, we'll fight it together," she said firmly. And I love you, not just today, but forever. Ethan sat beside them, his hand resting on Nia's shoulder. You are our daughter, he said, voice soft and steady. No illness, no fear, no storm will ever change that. We're here, just like I promised the day you came into our lives. Nia nodded, her smile returning, and she hugged them both tight. Aaliyah looked into Ethan's eyes full of warmth, shared purpose, and unspoken devotion. She thought of everything that had brought them here, from a cold contract in Ethan's sterile office, where she thought she had signed away her freedom, to this night, where she had found a family, a purpose, and a love deeper than anything she could have imagined. What are you thinking? Aaliyah asked, as Nia skipped off to fetch cookies from Mrs. Harris. Ethan smiled, his gaze soft. I'm thinking about how close I came to missing all of this, he murmured. If you hadn't needed help with your family, if I hadn't read your file, if you had said no to the contract, but you said yes. And now we're here, with Nia, with each other. Aaliyah leaned into him, feeling his warmth. Do you regret how we started? She asked gently. Ethan shook his head, his hand tightening around hers. I regret making you hurt. I regret believing a contract could replace love, he said. But I don't regret where it led us. You and Nia. You're my hope. Aaliyah, a future I never dared to believe I deserved. They sat beneath a sky painted with stars, Nia's laughter ringing through the air like wind chimes in the breeze. Aaliyah thought of their journey from the alleys of Chicago to the halls of the Caldwell estate, from a black woman trapped in a contract to a mother, a wife, a nurse. Once a soulless billionaire, Ethan had become the man she loved, the father Nia needed. And Nia, who had survived disease and loss, was the light that completed their home. When Nia returned with a plate of cookies, she nestled between them, chattering about the stars she wanted to explore. Aaliyah smiled, sending a silent thank you to fate for bringing them together. 1 year ago, she thought she had signed her life away. But now she understood it wasn't a prison contract. It was a promise. Not just to Ethan, but to her heart, leading her to a home she never wanted to leave.